Good evening, and welcome back, sleepless historian. Tonight, we begin a long and quiet journey, one that winds through mountains of marble, oceans of myth, and the first whispers of creation itself. This is the story of Greek mythology, not as thunder and heroism, but as the soft unfolding of ideas that shaped the ancient world. A story born before memory, before men, and even before time. Before we begin, if you're listening from a different country, tell me your country and the time where you are down below in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. And if this story helps you relax, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who loves a good bedtime tale. Your support is honestly what motivates me to keep creating these magical and sometimes spooky stories for everyone. We begin with the Greeks believed all things began, with chaos. Chaos was not disorder, not noise or confusion, but an empty space, a gaping void, quiet and unformed. It was the breath before the first word, the stillness before the first movement. From this silent expanse came the first beings, not gods as we would later know them, but ancient principles. They were the building blocks of existence. The first of these was Gaia, the earth, vast and steady. She was both the ground and the goddess, both presence and mother. From her body would rise mountains and seas, and from her thought would come life. Beside her emerged Tartarus, a deep abyss beneath the world, dark and endless. And above there formed Eros, the spirit of attraction, not romantic love, but the quiet force that draws things together, that binds what would otherwise drift apart. Next came Erebus and Nyx, darkness and night. Together they wrapped the world in shadow, soft and complete. And when their children were born, Aether, the bright upper air, and Hemera, the gentle daylight, the rhythm of existence began, day and night, light and dark, the slow breathing of the cosmos. In this quiet balance, Gaia grew restless. From herself, she brought forth Uranus, the sky, her equal and her opposite. When he stretched above her, the world found its form. The heavens embraced the earth, and between them, everything that would ever be began to take shape. They became the first divine pair, Gaia, the nourishing ground, and Uranus, the endless vault above. Together they gave birth to life, not as we know it, but as forces and powers. Their first children were the Titans, great and timeless beings who would one day rule the cosmos. Among them were Oceanus, the river that encircles the world, Hyperion, the light of the heavens, Theia, the shining, Rhea, the mother, and Kronos, the youngest, clever and patient. But not all of Gaia's children were fair and golden. Some were monstrous and vast, the Cyclopses with a single blazing eye, and the Hecatoncheires, giants with 100 hands and 50 heads. They were powerful, but Uranus feared them. He saw their strength as a threat, and so he hid them away, deep within Gaia's body, pressing them into the shadows beneath the earth. Gaia suffered. Her own children were trapped inside her, and the pain of their confinement echoed through the world. So she began to plan. From her anger and sorrow, she shaped a blade of flint, sharp and cold, and whispered to her children, asking which of them would help her end Uranus's reign. Only one stepped forward, Kronos, the youngest Titan, bold and quiet. who saw in his mother's pain the promise of power. One evening, as Uranus descended to embrace Gaia, Kronos lay in wait. When the moment came, he struck, a single, silent act that separated sky from earth forever. From the blood of Uranus that fell upon Gaia sprang new beings, the Erangies, spirits of vengeance, and the giants, fierce and unyielding. And from the sea foam that gathered around his severed form, a new goddess would one day rise, Aphrodite, born of both violence and beauty. The world had changed. Uranus had fallen, and the Titans were free. Kronos took the throne, and the age of the Titans began, an age of stillness and golden rule. But within that victory, a prophecy lingered. Before he vanished, Uranus spoke, one day, Kronos, too, would be overthrown by his own child. And so the cycle began, the quiet law that even gods could not escape. Each generation would rise and fall as power passed from one to the next. Creation, conflict, and renewal, the rhythm that would echo through every myth that followed. Kronos ruled with Rhea, his sister and queen. Their reign was peaceful, and the world was calm. The rivers flowed, the mountains stood, and the sky shone without storm or lightning. The gods that would come after them were not yet born, but the world was readying itself for them. In this age, time began. For Kronos was not only a king, but also the embodiment of time itself, patient, inevitable, and consuming. Everything born under his reign would one day age and fade. Even gods would feel his slow touch. Gaia watched her son from afar, proud perhaps, but wary. She had seen power turn to fear before, and she knew how swiftly peace could sour. For now the world was quiet, but in the quiet history began to gather, stories waiting to be told, destinies waiting to unfold. And as night settles over Olympus and the stars drift into place, we leave the first dawn of the gods, a world of earth and sky, of beginnings and whispers, where creation was still new and eternity had only just begun.
The age of the Titans was a quiet age. The wars of creation had ended, and the wounds of the world had begun to heal. Mountains rose from the earth like sleeping giants. Rivers found their paths to the sea, and time itself began to flow in an endless, steady rhythm. It was an age of stillness, the first golden age of the gods. At its center ruled Kronos, lord of the Titans, king of the world and master of time. He had freed his brothers and sisters from the depths of Gaia, and in return they had crowned him ruler over all things. With his queen Rhea, he governed the heavens, the earth, and the seas. The sun moved across the sky, the moon waxed and waned, and the stars turned gently above, as if all of existence breathed in calm unison. The Greeks later remembered this time as the Golden Age, when the earth gave its fruits freely, when men and women lived without sorrow or toil, and when no one yet knew the touch of death. It was a dreamlike time, half remembered, like a story told in sleep. But even in peace, the seeds of change were growing. Kronos had learned from his father's downfall. He had heard Uranus's final curse, that one day his own child would overthrow him. And so the Titan of time began to fear the future. For all his dominion over the passing of moments, he could not escape the slow approach of destiny. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Hestia, Kronos looked upon her and felt both love and terror. He remembered the prophecy, and his heart hardened. He could not allow the cycle to repeat, so he opened his mouth and swallowed the newborn whole. The act was silent, cold, and final. And in that instant, the curse of the Titans began. One by one, Rhea bore her children. After Hestia came Demeter, then Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Each time Kronos devoured them, fearing that one of them would take his throne. He became consumed by his own dread, and the golden age dimmed. The laughter of the Titans faded, and Rhea's heart grew heavy with grief. Gaia watched from the depths of the earth. She had seen this story before. A son who feared his children, a ruler who could not escape the wheel of fate. Time moved in circles, not lines, and the pattern repeated itself again and again. When Rhea became pregnant once more, she could no longer bear the thought of losing another child. In secret, she fled to the island of Crete, where deep within a hidden cave she gave birth to her last son, Zeus. Around her, the nymphs and spirits of the island guarded the newborn, and the gentle hum of the earth itself seemed to shield him. When the child cried, the curates, armed dancers of the mountain, clashed their shields together to drown the sound so Kronos would not hear. Rhea took a stone, wrapped it in swaddling cloth, and carried it back to Kronos. When she placed it in his arms, he swallowed it without question, thinking it was his son. And so Zeus was hidden, growing in secret while the Titan king sat secure upon his throne, unaware that destiny was quietly taking root beneath his feet. In the cave of Mount Ida, the young god was nursed by the goat Amalthea, whose milk sustained him, and honey dripped from the trees like golden rain. He grew quickly, and with each passing season his strength deepened. He listened to the whispers of Gaia, who had watched the world turn for ages, and she told him of the injustice that had come before him, of his brothers and sisters swallowed into darkness. When Zeus reached manhood, Gaia and Rhea came to him and revealed the truth of his birth. Together they devised a plan. Zeus would return to his father's court, not as a challenger, but as a servant. He came disguised, bearing a cup filled with a potion prepared by Gaia herself, a draught that would make Kronos yield what he had taken. When Kronos drank it, his stomach churned and twisted. One by one, the children he had swallowed came forth again: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, reborn into the world whole and shining. The children of Kronos stood before him, grown and powerful, the new gods of the age. Kronos looked upon them and saw what his father had once seen in him, the end of his own time. And in that realization, the heavens began to tremble. The balance that had held since the dawn of the world began to crack, as if the air itself knew that a great conflict was coming. The young gods fled to Mount Olympus, a high and sacred place that touched the sky. There they gathered their strength, and for the first time the world divided, the old gods against the new. On one side stood Kronos and the Titans, ancient and vast, dwelling on Mount Othrys. On the other stood Zeus and his siblings, the Olympians, bright and fierce, carrying the promise of change. The long peace of the Golden Age had ended. The sound of thunder echoed for the first time across the mountains, and the world held its breath. What had been still began to stir, and what had been eternal prepared to fight for its place in existence. And so, beneath the slow turning of the stars, the age of the Titans drew toward its twilight, and the age of Olympus waited just beyond the horizon.
The stillness of the world did not last. Peace, once born of silence, began to tremble beneath the weight of destiny. The children of Kronos had returned to the light, and their presence changed the air itself, as though time had quickened, and the steady breath of the cosmos grew shallow and uncertain. Zeus stood upon the high peak of Mount Olympus, watching the clouds gather beneath him. He could feel the pulse of the world, the slow turning of oceans, the restless murmuring of the mountains, and beneath it all, the deep voice of Gaia whispering of the conflict to come. The Titans ruled still from Mount Othrys, vast and ancient, their power spread across the horizon like the roots of a mountain. But the new gods had awakened, and their eyes were full of light. The war that followed would be known as the Titanomachy, the great war between the old gods and the new. It would last for 10 years, though in the timeless space of myth, those years stretched like centuries, unmeasured and endless. At first, the Titans looked upon Zeus and his siblings with disdain. To them, the young gods were reckless, untested, and small. They had known the stillness of eternity. The Olympians had only known the hunger of beginnings. But youth carries its own kind of power, the strength of motion, of change, of what must become. Zeus gathered his allies. At his side stood Poseidon, lord of the seas that had not yet been named, Hades, keeper of the depths beneath the earth, Hera, proud and fierce, Demeter, the gentle nourisher of life, and Hestia, the quiet flame that burned in every home and heart. Together, they formed the first council of the gods, a family bound not only by birth, but by purpose. Yet even united, they were few. The Titans were many, and their strength was vast. Kronos ruled them from his high throne, surrounded by his brothers and sisters, Iapetus, Hyperion, Coeus, Creus, and Oceanus. Only a few among the elder gods hesitated to fight. Oceanus, the encircling river, wished for peace, content to flow quietly around the world's edge, but others were eager for war. The first strikes of the conflict were not of sword or thunder, but of will. The heavens shook and mountains split. Zeus hurled his first bolts of lightning, the raw power of storm that had never before touched the earth. The air itself ignited, and for the first time the world knew thunder. From Othrys, Kronos answered with the weight of the stars, casting shadows across the sky that dimmed the light of day. The war grew louder, the seas boiled, forests burned, and the rivers turned aside from their paths. But for 10 years, neither side could gain victory. The Titans held the heights of Othrys, the Olympians held the peaks of Olympus, and between them the earth groaned, torn by the struggle of gods. It was then that Gaia came again to Zeus in secret. She whispered of allies forgotten, imprisoned long ago beneath the world, the children of Uranus, whom Kronos had hidden, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires. In their depths, she said, lay power enough to change the course of fate.
Zeus descended into Tartarus, the dark realm below all things. There in endless night he found the Cyclopes, towering beings with a single bright eye that glowed like the forge of stars. Their chains were thick, their voices heavy with the silence of centuries. Zeus broke their bonds, and in gratitude they offered him gifts of power. From their forges came 3 creations that would shape the age to come: the thunderbolt for Zeus, the trident for Poseidon, and the helm of invisibility for Hades. When Zeus returned to Olympus, the balance shifted. The heavens darkened, but the light within them grew sharper, clearer, like dawn piercing through storm clouds. He raised his arm, and the first true lightning bolt struck the mountains of Othrys. The air burned white, and the voice of the sky roared through every valley. Poseidon lifted his trident, and the seas rose to meet the sky. Waves higher than mountains crashed against the shore, sweeping across the land in shining arcs. Hades descended beneath the earth, unseen, moving through shadow, striking from within. The Titans faltered, their strength wavering beneath the combined might of the younger gods. The Hecatoncheires entered the battle, their forms vast as storms. They hurled mountains like stones, their arms rising and falling in unending rhythm. The world shook as if it too had come alive. Kronos fought with the fury of time itself, his sickle flashing in the dim light. But time, for once, was against him. For every strike he made, Zeus answered with thunder, and thunder always returned. At last the great Titan fell, and with him the order of the old world. The Titans were defeated. One by one, Zeus and his siblings bound them in chains forged by the Cyclopes, chains that no power could break. They cast them down into Tartarus, where they would dwell in the shadow of eternity, guarded by the 100-handed ones, whose loyalty now belonged to Zeus. The war was over. The heavens were quiet again, but not as they had been before. The stillness of the Titans had been replaced by the pulse of life, by wind and water, by fire and thought, by the endless motion of the new gods. Zeus stood upon Olympus, the storm fading around him, and looked across the world that now belonged to him and his kin. The age of the Titans had ended. The age of the Olympians had begun.
When the war had ended, silence fell across the heavens. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of rest, the deep breath that comes after great upheaval. The echoes of thunder faded, and the world, still trembling from the clash of gods, began to settle once more into shape. The Titans slept beneath the earth, bound in the gloom of Tartarus. Their reign had ended, but their memory remained, a reminder of what had come before and what might rise again if order were ever forgotten. Above them, upon the shining heights of Mount Olympus, Zeus took his place as king of gods and men. He did not rule alone. For the first time, the cosmos was divided, not in conflict, but in harmony. Zeus shared dominion with his brothers. To Poseidon he granted the seas, vast and unmeasured, home to countless spirits and deep mysteries. To Hades he gave the unseen realm beneath the earth, a kingdom of shadows in souls where silence reigned eternal. And for himself, Zeus claimed the sky, the ever-moving vault of wind and cloud, lightning and rain. Thus the world was ordered. The heavens, the seas, and the underworld each had their guardian, and balance returned to creation. But order, in the time of Zeus, was not the stillness of the Titans. It was motion shaped by rule, the dance of elements, the turning of seasons, the cycles of life and death. Where Kronos had sought to freeze time in fear, Zeus allowed it to move freely, to flow like a river that nourishes all it touches. Upon Olympus the gods began to gather. Each brought their own presence, their own power, until the mountain itself seemed to breathe. Hera, queen of the heavens, joined Zeus as his consort, proud, regal, and vigilant in her watch. Her gaze fell on the order of marriage and family, the bond that held mortals and immortals alike in their places. Demeter, gentle and patient, tended to the green earth, coaxing the fields to life. She became the quiet guardian of harvest and growth, and through her the mortal world began to thrive. Hestia, the eldest and calmest of the siblings, took her seat beside the hearth. Her flame was steady, neither bright nor dim, but constant. It burned in every home, in every temple, and in every heart that sought warmth and safety. Though she asked for no power, she was the soul of Olympus, the quiet center that held all things together. Athena would one day rise from the mind of Zeus himself, the spark of wisdom and reason. Apollo, radiant and measured, would bring light and music. Artemis, his twin, would rule the wild forests and the silver moon. Ares, fierce and proud, would carry the spirit of war. Aphrodite, born from the sea foam of an older age, would awaken love and longing. And Hermes, swift and clever, would walk between worlds, messenger, trickster, and guide. Thus the Olympian pantheon took form, not all at once, but as a gradual unfolding of order, beauty, and strife. Each god reflected some fragment of existence, thought and feeling, joy and pain, creation and decay. Together, they were not perfection, but balance. The Greeks would later see in this pantheon a mirror of themselves. For though these gods were immortal, they were not flawless. They loved and quarreled, envied and forgave, much like the mortals who built their temples. In this way, the divine became familiar, and the world itself seemed less distant. Zeus watched over all. From his high throne, he measured the fates of gods and men, keeping the harmony between heaven and earth. When storms rolled across the sky, it was said to be his voice, reminding creation of his power. When the rains returned after drought, it was his mercy, cooling the soil and restoring life. Yet even in this age of light, the shadow of fate remained. For in every order there lies the seed of its undoing. Zeus had brought peace to the world, but peace, like thunder, does not last forever. From the depths of the sea and the hearts of mortals, new stories began to stir, quiet at first, then stronger, like ripples before a wave. For while the gods ruled,
The world of men was awakening. They looked to the heavens and began to wonder, where did they come from? Why did they dream? What place did they hold in this vast design of divine powers and timeless beings? And so, beneath the gaze of Olympus, humanity began its slow rise. But their creation, their beginning, was not the work of Zeus alone. It would come from rebellion, from pity, and from a spark stolen from the heart of heaven.
After the war of the gods, when the heavens were calm again, the world waited to be filled. The mountains stood in their quiet places, the seas shimmered in stillness, and the air drifted without voice or purpose. It was beautiful, but empty, a grand stage without players. Zeus, seated upon Olympus, looked upon this silent world. The land was fertile, yet nothing moved upon it but the wind and the waves. The age of divine creation was not yet complete. And so the gods turned their thoughts to life, not the eternal kind like their own, but the fleeting kind that could live and die beneath their gaze. Among the Titans who had not fallen into darkness was one named Prometheus. He was the son of Iapetus, brother to Atlas, and though born of the old order, he was a friend to the new. Prometheus had watched the rise of the Olympians with quiet thoughtfulness. He was not mighty like Zeus or fierce like Poseidon, but he was clever, his mind sharp as flint, his heart touched by a strange compassion. It was Prometheus who first shaped humankind. Some say he molded them from clay, shaping their forms in the likeness of the gods. Others say he merely taught them the way of upright movement, the art of speech, and the memory of thought. Whichever version one believes, the meaning is the same. From the stillness of the earth, Prometheus drew forth beings who could dream. But humans at first were weak. They had no fur to protect them, no claws, no fangs, no wings. These shivered beneath the cold sky, unable to master the elements around them. Zeus watched them with distant curiosity, neither cruel nor kind, only cautious. He feared that too much power in mortal hands might one day rival the divine. Prometheus saw their suffering. He walked among them, unseen, teaching them to build homes of stone and clay, to gather fruits and seeds, to shape tools from the bones of the earth. But still they lacked warmth, the light that makes life flourish. And so Prometheus made a choice that would echo through eternity. He ascended to the heavens. There, upon the chariot of the sun, he reached out and stole a fragment of the sacred fire, the living flame of divine knowledge. He hid it within a hollow reed and carried it back to the mortal world, where he placed it gently into human hands. The flame flickered and grew, casting its golden glow across the night. The cold fled, the darkness retreated, and humankind began to rise from helplessness. For the first time, smoke rose toward Olympus, not from lightning, but from mortal fire. The gods looked down and saw a new light in the world, one they had not made. And Zeus's heart hardened. He saw in fire not warmth, but defiance. The mortals, once dependent, now possessed the power to create, to forge, to destroy. And Prometheus, the giver of that gift,
had done so without the will of the king of gods. Zeus's anger was slow but deep. He summoned Prometheus before him, and the Titan spoke without fear. He said that mankind needed fire to survive, that even the gods would lose nothing by granting them light. But Zeus did not yield. To him, compassion had limits, and rebellion had a price. Prometheus was bound to a lonely rock high upon the Caucasus Mountains, his wrists and ankles chained with unbreakable iron. Each day, an eagle, the symbol of Zeus himself, would descend and tear at his liver, which would grow back with each nightfall. Immortal pain, endless renewal. The punishment was meant not only for Prometheus, but as a warning to all who would challenge divine order.
Yet the fire remained on earth. Humanity kept it, and with it came knowledge, the art of metal and song, of language and dream. They began to shape their world, not as gods, but as imitators of gods. Creation, it seemed, had taken root beyond Olympus. Still, Zeus's wrath was not complete. He looked down upon humankind and decided that they must learn the weight of their gift, that every light must cast a shadow. And so he called upon Hephaestus, the divine smith, to shape a being from clay. She was crafted with care and beauty, each feature perfect and deliberate. The gods themselves bestowed her with gifts. Athena gave her wisdom. Aphrodite gave her grace. Hermes gave her cunning speech. They named her Pandora, meaning the all-gifted. Zeus sent her to the mortal world as a bride to Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept a gift from Zeus. But Epimetheus's heart was soft and his judgment slower than his brother's foresight. He welcomed Pandora into his home. She came carrying a jar, sometimes called a box, though it was no mere container. It held within it all the unseen forces of existence, sorrow and joy, illness and hope, despair and curiosity. Driven by wonder, Pandora lifted the lid. In an instant, the contents scattered into the world, every kind of pain and passion that would ever touch humankind. Only one thing remained beneath the lid: hope. From that moment on, the mortal world was no longer innocent. They knew beauty and suffering, love and loss, creation and ruin. And yet, even as they struggled beneath the weight of their new reality, the small ember of hope stayed with them, fragile but eternal. The gods watched. Some pitied humanity, others admired them. Even Zeus, stern as he was, saw something strange in these creatures of clay and fire, something familiar. For they too sought meaning in the endless flow of time, just as the gods did. And so the world moved forward, a world of gods above, mortals below, and the fragile bridge of fire and hope that connected them.
Time flowed gently after the age of fire.
The gods still ruled from Olympus, their thrones bright and steady, but the world below had begun to change. Where once only forests and rivers filled the land, now cities and altars began to appear. Mortals had learned to dream, and from their dreams came the first stories of courage and fate, the stories of heroes. These were not gods, nor were they ordinary men. They stood between the two worlds, touched by divine blood, yet bound by mortal weakness. Through them, the will of the gods took shape in the human realm, and through their struggles, humankind learned what it meant to rise, to fail, and to endure. Among the first was Perseus, born of a mortal woman and fathered by Zeus himself. His mother, Danae, had been locked away in a bronze chamber by her father, King Acrisius, who feared a prophecy that her son would one day bring about his death. But prophecies are not easily silenced. Zeus visited her in the form of golden light, and from that light Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius discovered the child, he set mother and son adrift upon the sea, sealed inside a wooden chest. But fate, as it always does, guided them safely to the island of Seriphos. There, Perseus grew into a strong and kind young man. Yet peace is rarely the destiny of heroes. The king of Seriphos desired Danae and sought to rid himself of her son. He commanded Perseus to fetch the head of Medusa, the Gorgon, a creature so dreadful that her gaze could turn any living thing to stone. It was a task meant to bring certain death, but the gods, perhaps remembering the courage of Prometheus, watched with favor. Athena gave Perseus a shining shield, polished to mirror brightness. Hermes lent him a sickle of adamantine and a pair of winged sandals. With these gifts, Perseus journeyed to the ends of the earth, where night met the edge of ocean. There he found the Gorgons sleeping among the stones of their own victims. He did not look upon Medusa directly, but through the reflection of his shield. With one swift stroke, he severed her head, from which sprang the winged horse Pegasus, born of her blood and the lingering touch of Poseidon. Perseus carried the head back, using its power to turn the cruel king to stone. In time, he would fulfill the old prophecy, not through hatred, but by chance. A discus thrown in sport struck his grandfather Acrisius, and so fate, ever patient, came quietly full circle. From Perseus came a noble line, heroes, kings, and warriors who bridged the divine and mortal worlds. But none among them would match the might of Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene. His story, like all that involves Olympus, began in jealousy. Hera, the queen of the gods, could not forgive Zeus's faithlessness. When Heracles was born, she sent 2 serpents to destroy him in his cradle. But the infant, strong even then, grasped each serpent in his tiny hands and crushed them without fear. Thus began a life marked by both blessing and burden. As a man, Heracles was unmatched in strength and spirit. Yet Hera's wrath followed him. Through her influence, madness seized his mind, and in that frenzy he struck down those he loved most. When his senses returned, the weight of his actions drove him to seek atonement. The oracle at Delphi commanded him to serve King Eurystheus, who would assign him 12 impossible tasks, the famous labors of Heracles. They were meant as punishment, but they became his path to immortality. He faced the Nemean lion, whose hide no weapon could pierce, and strangled it with his bare hands. He slew the Lernaean hydra, burning each severed neck so it could not grow back. He captured the Cyrenian hind, swift as light, and the Erymanthian boar, whose fury shook the mountains. He cleansed the Augean stables, which held years of filth by rerouting 2 great rivers through them. He drove away the Stymphalian birds, beasts of bronze and claw, and brought back the Cretan bull alive. He tamed the horses of Diomedes, who fed upon human flesh, and claimed the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. He stole the cattle of Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies, and finally descended to the underworld itself to bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed guardian of Hades. Each labor tested more than strength. It tested the endurance of the soul. Through suffering, Heracles found purpose. Through struggle, he found peace. When his mortal life ended, Zeus lifted him to Olympus, granting him a place among the gods. Even Hera, long his enemy, at last forgave him. And so, from Perseus and Heracles came the spirit of the heroic age, a bridge between divine destiny and human courage. The Greeks told their stories not merely as myths, but as mirrors. Each hero, with all his flaws and triumphs, reflected the restless striving within every human heart. For the gods were eternal, but static. The heroes were mortal, but changing. And it was in their change, in their effort and imperfection, that the Greeks found meaning. The age of heroes would not last forever, but before it faded, one final tale would echo through the centuries. A war fought not by gods, though they watched, but by men who sought glory, vengeance, and love. It would begin with a single name, Helen.
By the time the Age of Heroes reached its height, the world had become a tapestry of kingdoms and kings. The gods still watched from Olympus, but the stories of the earth now belonged mostly to mortals, to their loves, their rivalries, and the brief brightness of their lives. Among these stories, none would echo louder than the tale of Troy, a city of stone and pride where beauty and destiny would meet in war. It began, as so many myths do, with a contest. High on Olympus, at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the gods gathered in celebration. All were invited, except one. Eris, the goddess of discord, had been left unwelcomed. Offended, she appeared unbidden, casting among them a golden apple inscribed with 3 simple words, "To the fairest." At once, the harmony of the gathering dissolved. 3 goddesses claimed the apple: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom; and Aphrodite, goddess of love. Their quarrel could not be settled by Zeus himself, for even he knew that no judgment in such a matter would bring peace. And so he chose a mortal to decide. That mortal was Paris, a prince of Troy.
young, graceful, and thoughtful, known more for his charm than his wisdom. The goddesses appeared before him, each offering a gift to sway his choice. Hera promised him power over kingdoms. Athena offered victory in battle. But Aphrodite, with a quiet smile, promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. In that choice, the seeds of war were sown. The woman Aphrodite had promised was Helen, the queen of Sparta, wife to King Menelaus. Her beauty was said to shine like moonlight upon calm water. When Paris journeyed to Sparta under the guise of diplomacy, he saw her, and Helen saw him. Some say she was enchanted, others that her heart chose freely. But in the end, she left with him for Troy. When Menelaus awoke to find her gone, his anger burned cold and steady. He called upon his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, and together they summoned the might of Greece. From every coast and island came warriors and ships, heroes of legend, bound not just by vengeance, but by oath. Among them were Odysseus, clever and reluctant; Ajax, proud and unyielding; Diomedes, fierce and loyal; and Achilles, the greatest of all, swift and radiant as a god. They sailed eastward, carried by the winds of destiny to the shining walls of Troy. The war that followed would last 10 years. It was not one great battle, but many, a rhythm of advance and retreat, of pride and grief. The gods themselves took sides. Hera and Athena, scorned by Paris's choice, aided the Greeks. Aphrodite protected Troy and her favorite prince. And Zeus, though bound to neutrality, could not resist the pull of fate that wove through it all. The fields before Troy became a stage for heroism and loss. Achilles, the son of the sea nymph Thetis, fought with unmatched skill. He was nearly invincible, save for the single place where his mother's hand had held him when she dipped him in the sacred river Styx. But even he could not escape the slow tide of destiny. When his friend Patroclus fell beneath the spear of Hector, prince of Troy, Achilles' grief turned to fury. He returned to battle and slew Hector before the gates, his rage echoing through the plain. The gods watched in silence, for even divine beings cannot halt the sorrow of men. At last, Troy fell not through might, but through cunning. Odysseus conceived a trick, a great wooden horse, left as an offering of surrender. Inside it hid the warriors of Greece. The Trojans brought it within their walls, and when night came, the city's fate was sealed. The gates opened from within, the fires rose, and the long war came to an end. Helen was taken back to Greece, though her heart remained lost in memory. Paris fell beneath the ruins of his city, and the heroes, their glory won, began their long journeys home, some never to return. The story of Troy was more than a tale of war. It was the moment when myth and history touched, when gods and mortals shared the same battlefield. For in every arrow loosed, in every ship that burned, the Greeks saw reflections of their own hearts, love, pride, vengeance, and the endless longing for immortality through memory. Even the gods, eternal as they were, seemed to fade a little in the smoke of that great city. For the world was changing. Men now carried their own legends. The age of heroes was nearing its twilight. From the ashes of Troy, new stories would rise, tales not of battle, but of journeys. For one man's voyage home would carry the echo of all that came before and all that would follow. And his name was Odysseus.
Far below the roots of mountains and rivers, the Greeks imagined a realm unseen by the living. It was neither wholly dark nor entirely cruel, but vast, a silent mirror to the world above. This was the underworld, the kingdom of Hades. When the three brothers divided creation after the war with the Titans, Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld, not as punishment, but as balance. He ruled over all that lay beyond life, keeping the unseen order that followed every mortal breath. The Greeks did not imagine Hades as evil. He was stern, yes, and distant, but just. His task was to preserve the boundary between life and death, to ensure that all who crossed into his domain remained there. To him belonged not only the dead, but the wealth of the earth itself, the deep metals, the buried seeds, the silent pulse of life renewing within soil. For this reason he was sometimes called Pluton, meaning the giver of riches. The entrance to his realm was said to lie at the edges of the known world, near hidden caverns or still lakes where the air hung heavy. There, the souls of the dead gathered after their final rites, guided by the silent hand of Hermes Psychopompos, Hermes, the guide of souls. He led them to the riverbanks, where the old ferryman Charon awaited. For a single coin placed beneath the tongue, a payment for passage, the dead were carried across the dark waters of the river Styx. Those without the coin, or without proper burial, were said to wander the shores for 100 years, unseen and forgotten. Beyond the river lay the great gates of the underworld, guarded by Cerberus, the hound of 3 heads and serpent tail. No living mortal passed him easily, and no soul that entered could leave without the will of the gods. Inside stretched a landscape both shadowed and serene. The souls of ordinary men drifted through meadows of twilight, murmuring softly like wind through reeds. The poets called this place the Asphodel Fields, where most souls simply existed, not punished, not rewarded, only remembered.
Beneath the earth, far below the roots of mountains and rivers, the Greeks imagined a realm unseen by the living. It was neither wholly dark nor entirely cruel, but vast, a silent mirror to the world above. This was the underworld, the kingdom of Hades. When the 3 brothers divided creation after the war with the Titans, Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld, not as punishment, but as balance. He ruled over all that lay beyond life, keeping the unseen order that followed every mortal breath. The Greeks did not imagine Hades as evil. He was stern, yes, and distant, but just. His task was to preserve the boundary between life and death,
to ensure that all who crossed into his domain remained there. To him belonged not only the dead, but the wealth of the earth itself, the deep metals, the buried seeds, the silent pulse of life renewing within soil. For this reason he was sometimes called Pluton, meaning the giver of riches. The entrance to his realm was said to lie at the edges of the known world, near hidden caverns or still lakes where the air hung heavy. There the souls of the dead gathered after their final rites, guided by the silent hand of Hermes Psychopompylus, Hermes, the guide of souls. He led them to the riverbanks, where the old ferryman Charon awaited. For a single coin placed beneath the tongue, a payment for passage, the dead were carried across the dark waters of the river Styx. Those without the coin, or without proper burial, were said to wander the shores for 100 years, unseen and forgotten. Beyond the river lay the great gates of the underworld, guarded by Cerberus, the hound of 3 heads and serpent tail. No living mortal passed him easily, and no soul that entered could leave without the will of the gods. Inside stretched a landscape both shadowed and serene. The souls of ordinary men drifted through meadows of twilight, murmuring softly like wind through reeds. The poets called this place the Asphodel Fields, where most souls simply existed, not punished, not rewarded, only remembered. Deeper still lay the darker regions where Tartarus sank into infinite gloom. Here dwelt the Titans, bound since the war of old, and others who had defied divine law. Tartarus was not merely a prison, it was the weight of eternity itself, pressing down upon those who sought to escape the natural order. And beyond all sorrow, at the farthest edge, the Greeks imagined a gentler land, Elysium, the fields of the blessed. This was where heroes and the righteous few would dwell, surrounded by gentle breezes and golden light. Here the air was always mild, and song drifted like a slow river through the trees. It was not a heaven of reward, but a peace beyond struggle, the calm that comes when all labors are done. Among all these realms walked the queen of that silent world, Persephone, daughter of Demeter. Her story, more than any, bound the upper and lower worlds together. Once Persephone had danced in the sunlit meadows of the earth, gathering flowers with her companions. But Hades, who had long ruled alone, saw her and desired her presence beside his throne. In a moment the ground opened beneath her feet, and the chariot of Hades rose from the depths. He carried her below, and the earth closed again, leaving only silence above. When Demeter, goddess of the harvest, learned that her daughter was gone, her grief filled the world. She wandered across the lands, calling her name, but none could answer. In her sorrow, the fields grew barren, the trees shed their leaves, and the air turned cold. Mortals began to starve, and even the gods took notice. At last, Zeus sent Hermes to the underworld to negotiate her return. Hades, though unwilling to lose her entirely, agreed that Persephone could return to the surface for part of each year. But before she departed, she ate a few seeds of the pomegranate, the fruit of the dead. Those few bites bound her to the underworld forever, ensuring she must return when the seasons turned. And so the world learned rhythm. Each spring Persephone rose again, and the earth blossomed with her joy. Each autumn she descended once more, and the land grew quiet in mourning. Through her, the Greeks saw that even in death there was renewal, that loss and return were parts of the same eternal cycle. To the Greeks, the underworld was not a place of fear, but of inevitability. It was the quiet destination of all living things, a place of memory, where the stories of the living found rest. Every birth echoed with her return, and every death with her descent. And so, even in their mourning, the people of Greece found comfort. They believed that the soul endured, changed, but not ended. Like the grain buried in the earth that rises again as new life, so too did the spirit pass through darkness into calm. The world above and the world below were never separate, only divided by a thin veil, as delicate and shifting as the wind that moves through long grass. Through that veil, they imagined, the gods watched and the dead listened. For all things, even the stars themselves, moved in cycles, light, shadow, and light again.
The world turns, always. Even the heavens, though they seem still, drift slowly across the ages. So too did the realm of the gods begin to change. For countless generations, Olympus had stood high and gleaming, its halls bright with immortal laughter, its thrones eternal. Mortals looked upward in reverence, offering sacrifices, whispering prayers, and telling stories by firelight. But the stories began to shift. Where once they were tales of thunder and lightning, of divine anger and grace, now they became echoes, gentler, distant, retold more as memory than belief. The Greeks of later ages still honored the old names: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Athena. They still built temples and offered gifts, but their hearts had begun to turn inward. They wondered less about the will of the gods and more about the nature of man. The philosophers rose, quiet thinkers who sought reason within the world rather than above it. They spoke of cause and form, of virtue and understanding, of balance that came not from Olympus, but from within the soul itself. The divine order, they said, was not a kingdom in the clouds, but a harmony that lived in every mind capable of thought. And slowly the gods began to fade. Not in anger, not in defeat, but as stars fade before the dawn. Their light was still there, only hidden beneath a new kind of brightness. For though belief changed, the myths endured. They became symbols, teaching tools, and poetry. Zeus became the image of law, Athena of wisdom, Apollo of reason and light, Dionysus of passion and art. Each god lived on, not in temple stone, but in story and in the quiet architecture of the human spirit. In time, the poets took their place beside the priests. They no longer spoke to the gods, they spoke of them, and in doing so, they preserved them. Through verse and song, through drama and tragedy, they turned faith into memory, and memory into art.
The Romans would later take up those names and reshape them. Jupiter, Neptune, Venus, Mars, all shadows of the old Olympians, translated into a new tongue, serving new empires. Even as the centuries passed and new religions rose, the old stories remained beneath the surface, not gone, but sleeping, like seeds waiting beneath the soil. And perhaps that is what immortality truly means. Not the endless life of the body, nor even the unbroken reign of the divine, but remembrance, to be spoken of, to be imagined, to live in the quiet thought of those who come after. The Greeks understood this, even as their temples fell to ruin. They carved their myths into marble, painted them on vases, wove them into the rhythm of the sea and the wind. Every wave upon the shore carried a fragment of those tales. Every mountain seemed to hold the weight of Olympus in its silence. In the end, the gods did not die. They simply withdrew into the sky, into the earth, into the hearts of those who still dream. Their stories became the pulse beneath all stories, the distant hum behind every word of wonder. And perhaps, if one listens closely, in the hush of a late night, or the whisper of waves against stone, one might still hear them. The murmur of Zeus's thunder beyond the horizon, the rustle of Athena's owl in the dark, the sigh of Poseidon in the deep. For myth, after all, is not bound by time. It lives wherever curiosity stirs, and silence invites the imagination to speak. The Greeks gave their gods names, but in truth they were giving form to the unknown, to the endless questions of where we come from, why we dream, and what waits beyond the stars. Those questions remain, and so too do the gods. The stories do not end. They only rest, like embers beneath ash, waiting for breath. And when we remember them, even in the softest voice, Olympus stirs again.